Hey friends, welcome back to the Lifestyle School podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about something that every single person who has ever changed their health, their habits, their body, their identity has had to walk through, but almost nobody talks about this part out loud. And it's the part of the journey that isn't glamorous. It's not, you know, cool. It's not like a recipe. It's not a fasting protocol. It's not a workout plan. But without this piece, none of these other things will ever stick. And what I'm talking about is the shedding of the old self, the shedding of beliefs, of identities, coping patterns, and even relationships that belong to a version of you that, you're no longer willing to be. Hopefully, right? If you want long-term health, sustainable weight loss, if you want confidence, energy, clarity, if you want a life you actually feel proud to live, you have to pass through this doorway, so to speak. There's no way around it, and it's not easy, but I want to tell you it is unbelievably worth it. So today we're going to walk through what shedding really looks like, not the Instagram version, but the real, raw human version. And my hope is that you're going to walk away from this episode feeling both seen and strengthened, because if you're going through this right now, you're not doing it wrong. You're actually right on track. And especially as we're like in the midst of this holiday season, January 1st is right around the corner. I feel like there's not a better time to be talking about this, because January 1st usually comes and people are like, let's make all these goals. We're going to change our life, all of our habits. We're going to become a new person, but we don't actually think about this piece of the puzzle. So, as always, before we get into it, a little disclaimer, I am not a medical doctor. This is not medical advice, and this podcast is for educational purposes only. So make sure that you are working with a qualified healthcare professional before you make any major changes to your lifestyle if needed. Okay, so with that, guys, let's get into it. So when people say they want to, quote, change their life, what they often imagine is, adding in new habits, right? On top of who they already are. They want to sprinkle in some healthier meals, maybe a little bit of walking, maybe a fasting routine, but they want to they want to stay fundamentally the same person. But I have to tell you, unfortunately, sadly, it doesn't work like that. I've been doing this for a decade. It just doesn't work. Real change, the kind that lasts, requires an identity shift. And every identity shift begins with an identity death. Let me say that again. Every identity shift begins with an identity death. And I'm going to be honest, this can feel incredibly destabilizing, because your identity is the lens you've used for years to make sense of the world, right? It's the story you've told yourself about who you are, what you're capable of, what kind of body you have, how much discipline you have, what kind of life you quote unquote fit into. And even negative identities feel safe because they're familiar, right? If you've been saying things for years like, I'm tired, like I'm a tired person. I'm not athletic. I always fall off the train. I'm an all or nothing type of person. I put myself last. Like, I always put everyone's needs before myself. I don't have the metabolism that other women have or other men have. Everyone else can stick to things. I just can't. These stories start to feel true simply because you've rehearsed them so long in your head, and sometimes even out loud, right? And when you begin changing your habits, even if those changes are small, you're actually challenging the entire ecosystem of beliefs that have kept your old identity alive. And that's why change can feel really scary, right? Even when it's good change, on a subconscious level, your brain is thinking, well, if I let go of this identity, who am I? Right? How do I navigate the world in this new way? Where do I belong? What will people expect or think of me? Right? And I have a perfect example of this. So when I worked in clinic doing nutrition coaching, we would do a bunch of testing, and then I would sit down with people and talk to them about the lifestyle changes and the food specific changes that they needed to make if they wanted to achieve the health goals, that they were coming in paying thousands of dollars sometimes, right, to try to achieve. And I worked with a lot of really sick people who had gone down all the routes that they could, and this was like their last ditch effort. And so I would sit with people, and usually it was around food sensitivity testing. And they would see, like, oh, wow, there's a lot of foods that they eat on a regular basis that are causing them to have issues, right? A lot of times, like inflammation, whatnot. And I can't tell you how many times I had people like actually have tears coming down their cheeks, crying when they see these results because it's that realization of, oh, wow, like this is going to be different, right? And, it's a really big deal, it's uncomfortable. And, um, this is why, this transformation often comes with a sense of disorientation, not because you're failing, but because you're stepping outside of the boundaries of your old life, right? You gotta think about things differently. This isn't just weight loss. It's just not eating healthier. It's a physiological and spiritual metamorphosis. And yes, it feels like grief, and it can even look like grief sometimes, right? Like people crying in an office with me. But grief for who you were, grief for the version of you that protected you, even if, she held you back, grief for how long you stayed maybe small. But but what comes after that grief, the identity rebirth, is where the magic really happens when you begin saying things like, I am someone who honors my body. I am someone who's learning new patterns. I am someone who's capable of growth. I am capable of change. I am someone who follows through. I am capable of doing hard things, right? These are all things that as we start saying them, I am someone who choose foods that love me back. That's a big one. When we start this identity work, it is the deepest work of all, and it is the foundation of transformation when it comes to changing our lifestyle for the better, for our best health. So many of your struggles with food, with routine, with movement, body image, and consistency aren't really personal flaws. What they are programs, okay? Hand me down beliefs, maybe family patterns, maybe cultural messages, maybe their childhood stories. They could be religious pressures, or they might be survival strategies. Okay. You didn't necessarily choose them. Many of them were likely imprinted on you. And, some of us grew up in homes where food meant safety, right? Where you weren't allowed to leave food uneaten. You were part of the clean plate club, whether you like it or not. Where you coped with chaos by eating food, or where dieting was normal, but emotional healing was not. Some of us were raised in families where women didn't have autonomy over their health. Maybe they were taught to be grateful no matter what, not to necessarily be well. Maybe we were taught to accept pain and not question it. Ask like, "Oh, is it actually like should this be painful?" Right? Or maybe you were taught that tending to your health was vanity or selfishness. And some of us were taught that our body was an inconvenience and that you had to, quote, fit in, right? That you shouldn't make other people uncomfortable with your needs. This is a really big one, that you shouldn't make other people uncomfortable with your needs. And some of us have internalized beliefs about ourselves so young that we stopped questioning them, right? I've always said one of the most important parts of this process is just being curious, right? We always have to be questioning ourselves, our actions, our beliefs, the information we're taking in, and asking these questions. Um, and some of us have internalized beliefs about ourselves really young. and we've stopped questioning them. Things like, I gain weight easily, or I have no discipline. I'm the big one in my family, or we're just not healthy people. Like we're all heavy set, or I don't need help. I just need to try harder. That's one that I really struggle with. And these aren't truths. What they truly are old scripts, right? And shedding these inherited beliefs takes courage because you're not just disagreeing with a thought, you're disagreeing with the people, the cultures, and the systems that gave them to you. I want to say that again because I think this is really important. And I think hopefully you're going to have some aha moments after this episode's done and you're hopefully reflecting on some of these things. But shedding these habits, or not habits, shedding these inherited beliefs takes courage because you're not just disagreeing with a thought, you're disagreeing with the people, the culture, and the systems that gave them to you. And if you feel disloyal, and or not, it's just I said that wrong. And it can feel disloyal to outgrow the patterns that we were taught, right? As someone who's really values loyalty, I have felt this, right? And you can feel that you're betraying your upbringing when you choose better for yourself, when you choose something different. You can feel like you're, maybe too much or too picky when you start advocating for your health. And here's the reality, guys. You're not betraying your family. You're breaking generational cycles. You're not being dramatic. You're being awake. And you're not being selfish. You are being responsible. And you can honor where you came from while refusing to carry beliefs that were never meant for you. Okay. And that is where real healing starts. This is where generational healing begins. And this is identity reshaping truly on the deepest level. And it is a lot of hard work. So, this is where transformation gets really raw. And I want to just like say this. I'm saying this with like all of the love and compassion for you guys because I've been working with people for a decade and change is super hard. And I've been trying to work on myself, right? For the last decade as well. And I realized for myself, change is so hard, right? And so I'm saying this with like all the love and compassion. And I just want you to feel empowered to go there on your own journey because truly I want to see people be well. And it doesn't happen unless we address these underlying things. So I know this is like a super heavy topic, but we're going there today, guys. We are going. So let's talk about where transformation gets really raw. When we talk about emotional eating, we often talk about it like, it's some shameful flaw or maybe a lack of willpower or a weakness that we have. But emotional eating is actually a sign of deep intelligence, I think. It's your body saying, I don't know how to help you, but I know how to numb you, right? I know how to like put a band-aid on it. And food becomes a buffer between you and your feelings, between maybe you and the stress of whatever you're experiencing, maybe between you and the loneliness that you're feeling, maybe between you and fatigue or overwhelm. When you start healing your health, you remove that buffer, and suddenly you're face to face with emotions that you haven't had to feel fully in a really long time. And that is why this process feels very hard and very confronting. Okay. Because you're not just losing cravings, you're losing a type of protection, right? You're not just stopping snacking, you're stopping self-soothing. It's like taking a pacifier away from a toddler, right? And you're not just skipping sugar, you're realizing sugar was holding parts of you together. And this is why healing isn't linear, and it's why changing habits feels very vulnerable. And this is why people panic when they lose their coping mechanism. But this is part of the journey where you grow the most, right? We don't grow when things are easy, we grow when things are hard. Because The woman that you're becoming doesn't hide from her emotions, right? She learns from them. She leans into them and she asks the important questions. And that is like, what am I really craving right now? What am I avoiding? What needs attention in my life? What feels really hard? And what emotion is asking to be felt? Because shedding emotional coping patterns is not about being disciplined, it's about being honest. And let me tell you, this is the work, the work that needs to be done, but can be so hard, right? This is the work that changes you literally from the inside out. And it allows you freedom to then go forth and actually become the person that has the lifestyle, the health, and to live at the weight that you desire, right? This is one of the biggest barriers, I think, in our health that most don't even realize. Maybe you have, speaking to the ladies out there, the good girl identity, and it was programmed very early for you. And it means like you have to be agreeable. You don't make waves, you don't inconvenience anyone. Asking for a gluten-free menu is, a big step. You don't have needs. You're not loud. You don't take up too much space. You definitely don't prioritize yourself, right? Like you are the last one, because you got to take care of everyone else. And, you're not too much, quote, too much, right? And because you were rewarded for being, quote unquote, good and, being just like this easy person to exist alongside, you learn to equate self neglect with virtue. And unfortunately, we see this a lot of the times. And I think, for some of these, especially like the whole we don't prioritize ourselves, I see this with the moms that I work with a lot, right? You learned that martyrdom earns approval. You learn that exhaustion is normal, it's glorified. You learn that you're supposed to feel guilty for wanting more. And, this shows up, um if these things that I'm going to list off here show up for you, hopefully this gives you a little bit of like a red flag, like, oh, I need to pay attention to this. So maybe you feel bad for spending money on healthy food, right? Maybe you apologize for needing time to yourself. Maybe you say yes when your whole body is like, no, I need to rest, but oh, I can't say no, right? Maybe you feel uncomfortable going into a situation and eating differently than others. Maybe you let your needs fall to the bottom of your list. Maybe you pretend you're fine when you're really not. Instead of communicating, you just, I'm fine. You don't want to make waves. You don't want to be a problem. And maybe you downplay your goals to make others feel more comfortable. And here's the truth that most people don't want to say out loud. You can either stay the good girl, the easy person to be around, or you can become the healthy, grounded, confident person that you were meant to be. But you can't be both. I want to be clear, you can't be both. Shedding this mentality and this programming is shedding the belief that your worth is tied to how much you tolerate. And I think there's a lot of reclaiming that needs to happen, right? You need to reclaim your right to have needs, to care for your body. You need to reclaim your right to say no and like have actual boundaries, right? You need to reclaim your right to live a life that supports you, not just everyone else around you. Healthy women aren't, quote, good girls. Healthy women are whole. They're whole, right? And I think we need to like separate and divorce those two things from each other. And, I think we underestimate how deeply ingrained our routines are, not just because they're healthy, but because they're predictable, right? Maybe your nightly glass of wine wasn't just wine. It was like your pause button, right? Um, maybe your overeating wasn't just, overeating for the sake of overeating. Maybe it was how you were disconnected and disconnecting from stress. Maybe your habit of going to Starbucks every day wasn't just for the caffeine, it was the ritual of treating yourself, and maybe snacking wasn't just about hunger, it was about the stimulation or the distraction or maybe reward, right? These routines become emotional touch points in our day, and removing them can feel like losing a source of comfort, even if that comfort came with consequences. And I want to be clear, your brain's job is survival. It's not actually health, right? So it clings to anything familiar. So, oh, it's like we always snack at night. This must be safe. Or, oh, we always cope with sugar. This must be safety. Or, oh, we always unwind with wine. This is meant to be comfort, right? Your brain doesn't categorize habits as, good or bad necessarily. Excuse me. Your brain categorizes them as either predictable or unpredictable. And this is why change can feel really, really uncomfortable, not just because the new behaviors are worse, but because they're unfamiliar, right? But with repetition, the unfamiliar can become the new comfort, right? Soon that habit of walking to clear your mind becomes comforting. Maybe fasting becomes grounding, like you feel grounded while you fast. Maybe eating real food becomes energizing, right? That's the goal. Maybe going to bed early becomes soothing. I know I can say for this one for me is 100% on point. Saying no becomes empowering, and taking care of yourself becomes the new default. And I want to be clear, as like we're making these changes, you're not losing comfort. You're trading artificial comfort for true comfort, because you can't truly be comfortable if your health is deteriorating, right? And so, this might be one of the hardest pieces of shedding when we start to talk about relationships, but it's something that we have to talk about because relationships come with shared habits, with shared identities, and shared scripts. Okay, let's talk about this. So, when we start changing, and this is a conversation that I always end up having with people when I do my 8-week personalized coaching program, and it's honestly, it always makes me a little bit sad because um, this is can be one of the hardest parts of changing, right? But it's 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 just part of the process. Unfortunately, when we start changing, people notice, right? And some of our friends are going to celebrate it with us. Some of our family is going to celebrate with us. Some will feel inspired. Some will want to join you. But unfortunately, there's going to be others, and others might feel threatened. They may prefer you as someone who doesn't have boundaries. They might have preferred you as the person who joined in emotional eating and didn't question everything and anything. Someone maybe who stayed small, or someone who just made their life easier by not having needs and, setting those boundaries. And, sometimes the shedding isn't about necessarily walking away from people. Um, and I think our culture maybe does a little too much of like, oh, we're just gonna like cut them out because they don't agree with me, or we don't align on XYZ. It's truly about redefining roles in a relationship. So maybe you stop being the person who says yes to every family request. That could feel really hard. Maybe you stop participating in unhealthy social rituals. Maybe you stop pretending you're okay with habits that actually hurt you, right? Or maybe you stop hiding your growth to make someone else feel comfortable. And here's the raw and honest truth of the matter. Some relationships are going to survive your healing process. Some are going to get stronger. There's going to be some that evolve. And then sadly, there's going to be some relationships that don't survive. And I want to just say this, you cannot shrink yourself to maintain relationships that depend on your unhealthiness. Okay, I'm going to say that again because I think it's really important. You can't shrink yourself to maintain relationships that depend on your unhealthiness, right? If you lose someone because you got healthier, at the end of the day, I think it's really hard to say that they like truly loved you and wanted the best for you, or they loved your dysfunction, or they're just incredibly dysfunction functional themselves. And what I always tell clients when they're like coming up with these issues that are hard in relationships, I always remind them it's not about you, it's about the other person, right? And these people who we want to have a relationship with, they have a choice. They can choose to move with you, they can choose to grow with you, and or they could just choose to accept the new version of yourself, or they can disconnect, right? But at the end of the day, it's not about you. And so we can't take that onto ourselves. The people who belong in our future are the ones who celebrate our growth and don't resent it. And that's a really hard thing sometimes to swallow, because there might be some like long-term relationships that you have that are based in dysfunction, and there's a chance that they might not all survive. Every unhealthy pattern, moving on to like our lifestyle and how that looks in the shedding, every unhealthy pattern lives inside a larger lifestyle ecosystem, which is, I think, is also something that we have to look at and address when it comes to our health. So every unhealthy pattern lives inside this larger ecosystem. It's not just the food, it's not just the movement, stress, sleep, it's the system you're living in, right? And so the old self, before we're shedding, lives in chaos typically. You're going to be hard pressed to find someone who's doing really well on their health journey, who's like turned their life around, who hasn't figured this out. Chaos leads to dysregulation and being unwell. There's no structure, no preparation. You're reacting all day long. You're eating on the go constantly. You're staying up way too late, running on stress hormones, forgetting your own needs. You're winging or flying by the seat of your pants all the time, and you're constantly feeling behind. And the old self, this old version of you is likely surviving on adrenaline and convenience, right? And the new self can't be built on this old schedule and this old way of living, right? This new person that we're trying to grow into needs rhythms, they need systems, and they need routines that make healthy choices. And we have to make these healthy choices the path of least resistance. And that's not going to happen. Excuse me. I'm still getting over a cold. This path of least resistance does not happen on accident. It is intentional. And this is why Lifestyle School works. That is my 8-week course. It's because you don't just change your food, you have to change your life architecture. And that's like the whole reason why I decided to call it Lifestyle School, because we have to essentially go to school to learn how to change our lifestyle, right? We have to learn how to essentially reconstruct our lifestyle, because shedding our old lifestyle, it's really not punishment, right? It can feel really hard in the moment, but it's not punishment. It's liberation. It's like getting a budget. And if you've never had a budget, maybe you don't understand this, but like I used to have incredible money anxiety. Um, but my husband is amazing. He is like such a good budgeter. And right at the beginning of our marriage 10 years ago, we got on a budget and we were very poor. My husband was a medical student. I was a new mom and a business owner. And, we did not have a lot. But when you have a plan, when you're intentional, you feel liberated in your finances and in your lifestyle and in your health, right? So what this looks like is you're giving yourself margin, right? You're creating a calm environment for yourself. You're building reliability with yourself, and you're designing a life that can support your goals instead of undermining them. And this is where long-term transformation takes root. And so when we talk about the shedding, I think it's really important to talk about this point is that there is no fantasy of quick and easy change, right? Change takes work, it takes intention, and it can feel hard. And this is where I think people get stuck the most. And this is why, the joke is don't go to the gym in January, go in February because all the, January 1 people will be gone by then. Because this is where people get stuck. They want the body without the boundaries, right? They want to have like an amazing body, but not have like the boundaries of what it actually takes to get there, right? They want energy without the habits. They want the results without the process, or the transformation without the discomfort. But quick fixes create quick collapses, and programs that promise effortless change truly teach you nothing. Plans that are unsustainable keep you trapped, and shortcuts rob you of the self trust and resilience you need to maintain your progress. Um, and the fantasy of like a quote, easy, process has to die so that the reality of possible can be born, because real transformation is inconvenient. Truly, real transformation is inconvenient. It demands honesty with ourselves. It requires facing the parts of ourselves that we've ignored, right? Those emotions we were talking about earlier. It asks us to slow down long enough to feel things you've numbed for years, right? This is huge. We have to reconnect with self. And it forces you to confront your stories, your tendencies, and your patterns, right? But on the other side of that discomfort is the life that you want, and the one I think that you're hopefully after. And you don't need perfect days. You need consistent decisions, right? No one is perfect. You're not a robot. Excuse me, I forgot to bring my water in here, guys. See if we can make it to the end of the podcast without a huge coughing fit. But so you don't need perfect days. What you need is consistent decisions. You don't need patience. You need compassion for yourself, and you need no, you do need patience. Did I just say you don't need patience? You do need patience for yourself, and you need compassion for yourself, and you need willingness, right, to do the hard thing, to make the change, because progress comes from small choices made over long stretches of time, right? Once you shed the fantasy of easy, you make space for the truth, which is that this is hard, but you are capable of doing hard things. So, let's get into talking about like what happens after you shed everything, right? It's the rebirth. And this is the part that you can't fully understand until you're living in it. I don't truly think. After the shedding, there's like this settling period, and then there's like a grounding period, and then you find this like new sturdiness in your spirit and in your body that is really hard to describe. You begin to trust yourself in ways you actually probably didn't think were possible. You no longer feel controlled by your cravings. You no longer feel like you have to negotiate against your own well-being. You no longer avoid mirrors or photos of yourself. You no longer settle for exhaustion as your baseline. And you no longer abandon yourself when things get hard. You become someone you can rely on. And the rebirth brings gifts that diets never touch. Things like a calm nervous system, a sense of agency, clarity of mind, strength in your body, boundaries that feel natural instead of forced, habits that feel like you instead of like obligations, and a relationship with your body built on partnership versus punishment. And that is huge, right? And perhaps the most profound gift is, for the first time, you feel like you're living as the person you are always meant to be. You're not, not the conditioned self, not like the coping or small or inherited self, but the aligned self. You're the strong, grounded, healed self. And I think the beautiful part is that this version of yourself wasn't created. It was there all along. It was just uncovered. And it's absolutely worth the shedding that it took to find that person within ourselves. So, in closing, if you're in the middle of a shedding season, and you might have to go through multiple seasons of this, guys, If you're grieving old comforts, if you're wrestling with old beliefs, maybe you're bumping up against resistance or maybe facing uncomfortable truths, I want you to know that you're not failing. This discomfort doesn't mean you're failing. What it means is that you're transforming. And this is what real change feels like. You're stepping into a new identity, a new story, and truly a new life. So I just want to encourage you, keep going. You're doing the good work, okay? And I am so incredibly proud of you if you have embarked on this process. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here today with this like heavy topic of shedding because it is hard. Um, and if this episode hit home for you, I would feel so blessed and honored if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. And, if you haven't already, leave a comment. I'd love to hear anything that stuck out from the podcast for you. And, as always, I'm here and I want to walk alongside you as you create a lifestyle that supports the future that you want. Whether that's you decide to do one-on-one coaching with me with the 8-week personalized coaching program with the Lifestyle School course, if you want to just do the course by itself, or if you just want to shoot me a message, email, on Instagram, via comment. I always love to hear from you guys. It just makes doing this work of putting out a podcast every week, it just feels so worth it when I know people are listening and being encouraged. So guys, with that, I hope you're having a great holiday season, and we'll see you next week on the Lifestyle School podcast.